Families that are a blended family dynamic don't necessarily think about the implications that can happen when somebody passes away. We see this so often when clients come to us after someone has passed away, and the drama and the stress and the financial burden it's causing to these families because they're now in this fight or flight status. It can be resolved by making sure that your estate plan is done properly before anybody gets sick or passes away. When it comes to blended families, it is so important to make sure that you have a conversation with your spouse and really get to a point of understanding how are the different aspects of the family going to be cared for. Who do you want to get this property? Are we going to do equal percentages? What if the spouses come into the family together and they now have their family unit, but they didn't bring in equal parts to make up that community property, right? What if it's, one spouse had no money and the other spouse was very well off? Then is it going to be fair to the other family of the spouse that was well off to now have to split it with the kids that were not well off, right? These are all very specific things that really go into what a blended family dynamic situation looks like. It allows you to really work with an estate planning attorney to understand what can happen as a result. And it is so important to have that plan in place and to have conversations with the family so that if something were to happen, the family knows already this is what the plan is. Because what we're really trying to do here is prevent those family dynamics from going downhill, right? To prevent fighting from going on, because any of that is going to lead to litigation as well as a lot of fees from an attorney perspective. Some of the strategies that we look at for blended families really comes down to what your goal is. Let's say you have two spouses that come together and they each have two children from prior marriages. And let's say that they had equal percentages that they're bringing into the estate and they've now commingled all of their assets together. And let's say it's worth $2 million. That $2 million, you could say, well, if something happened to both of us, we would want everything to be shared equally between the four children, right? So they would each get $500,000. Makes it very simple. But then you have situations where maybe one of the spouses came in and they didn't contribute at all. They didn't have anything to bring to this $2 million estate. So would it be fair for the two children to inherit $1 million from this estate? It's up to you, right? This is where it comes into your planning. It also comes into you knowing your family members. How are your kids going to react to it? What are you going to need to do to have conversations beforehand with them to make sure that they understand why you're doing this, right? Maybe you're doing it because you feel for the family and you want to be able to provide that support because you know that maybe your kids are better off than those kids and you want to be able to provide for them something. You can't achieve this though without having constant communication with your kids about what is going to happen. If they just are in a situation where you were to pass away and they open up the estate plan and they see everything is split equally between these four kids, they might feel like there was some type of influence that you would have never done this to your kids, right? Or they think it's not fair. And so they're automatically getting attorneys now and trying to figure out maybe you weren't in your right mind when you were doing this because there was never a conversation. This is where having open communication is so important because then it's not just a slap in the face to them. It's them having that ability to have the communication and the conversation about what's going on. If there is a passing and one of the spouses were to pass away, the remaining spouse, as we will refer to as the surviving spouse, now potentially has to deal with stepchildren. In this situation, I do not generally see the situation going well. And usually it's the stepchildren of the surviving spouse that want money, or they want the house, they want the ex-spouse, or they want the surviving spouse out. They want them, they want that inheritance that they are entitled to. So there are certain strategies that we will work with clients to come up with what's the best solution so that we're not putting the surviving spouse in a situation where they've now lost their spouse and they're having to deal with the stepkids because they're emotional and hurt and they want to make sure that their part is getting taken care of. So some of these include maybe having a life insurance policy, right? So if something were to happen to you, instead of that life insurance policy going to your surviving spouse, that just goes to your surviving children. And then at that point, they know that that is their inheritance and they're getting nothing from the surviving spouse. So they have no reason to bother them. They have no reason to try and say, get out of my dad's house, whatever it may be, because these are all literally things that I hear. Okay. But the kids are being cared for. And so they have that feeling like, yes, my parent supported me and providing this to me. It is so unfortunate that it has to get to this, but unless you do this level of planning, it does get to it. And I hate to say it, but it drives families apart so much when these specific things happen. Another one that I've seen is maybe it wasn't a life insurance policy, but maybe it was a specific retirement account or an investment account generally. That's going to be a better tax savings. So the investment account, you could say, well, I want this investment account to go to my kids. And then they get that money free and clear. And they don't have to worry about what happens to stepmom and staying in the house, right? They're not trying to be a landlord and check in and see, what are you doing to the house? Why aren't you keeping it up? It's allowing them just to be able to have that relief to then cut ties of having that emotional side and being drawn in by the money. These are all things that with proper planning can be done prior to it being a bad situation for the family. Another really important side when it comes to blended families is maybe you have a child that isn't legally your child. Maybe it's a stepchild. Maybe it's somebody that you've just always had in your family that you think of as one of your children, but aren't legally one of your children. If something were to happen to you and you have no estate plan in place, that child is likely not going to be included. Because they are not legally your child, it doesn't mean that they would get anything from your estate. So if it is important to you that you treat them as one of your children, then you need to specifically identify them in your estate plan. Otherwise, they would have no say or be able to take any action to receive anything from your estate.